probably still a little bit more adjustments to be made, but that's basically how these are going to hook up. Well, hello YouTube. We're coming up on what is the beginning of the dark and muddy season here in Colorado. It starts to get dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, starts to rain, starts to snow. Start to see a lot more of that kind of crud on the trails, and a lot more likelihood of having it be dark on the way home from work. With this in mind, I've got some projects I want to get done on my JL before the season turns completely bad on us. So this is what we're going to be up to. I've got the Armor Light floor system I want to put in to help deal with the mud, dirt, and everything else that gets tracked into the Jeep this time of year. Also, time to address the fact that it's going to get dark and do some auxiliary lighting. With this in mind, we've got our rock light system. This is from a company called Lux Beam, or Lux Lighting. And what they do is they produce a light. It's an LED light molded into a polycarbonate housing with these magnets on the back. So just stick it in wherever you want, and 20 feet of wire on each one to get back to wherever it is that you want to be. I'm also going to do pillar lights with these brackets. It should be a really nice kind of trim piece with them since 1941. And then these 5-inch pods on the pillars. They definitely didn't look quite so big in my shopping cart, but we'll see how they work out. They should produce plenty of light. And then we're also going to do these 5-inch driving lights with the side shooters from the same company. Should be a good arrangement. On the JL, I have the factory Upfitter package that includes the 4 auxiliary switches, which means that I don't have to worry about fishing wires through the firewall for this particular project. There's 4 leads for the 4 switches that are left under the hood, and corresponding 4 leads that are also inside the vehicle. In my case, I'm going to use switches 1, 2, and 4 for the stuff we're working on today. Switch 3 will be reserved for backup lights later, and I won't be using any of those auxiliary switches inside the vehicle. I think the easiest part of this project is going to be the lights on the bumper. With this factory steel bumper from Mopar, we've got a whole bunch of bolts that are already here. We have the options of placement. Now the question is, within those choices, what do we want to do? I can certainly place it out here. My concern is that this represents something that is starting to be kind of out in the tire and potentially a little bit more exposed than I really want my light. I could move it in here, which is a position I really like in a lot of ways, but there is some concern that it could interfere with the factory tow hook. That may be an issue. Moving it further inboard, same kind of issue with the factory tow hook, and on this side I'm starting to wonder if that might have some impact on access to the winch. I don't think it will, but that may be a thing. Could certainly move it forward. That's definitely going to have interfere with the tow hook, though. There's also these positions here. Well, that's interesting. It does put the light right in front of the winch. Doesn't really interfere. And on this winch, there's basically no access between the front winch and the bumper anyway. So this is certainly a possibility. And we have the corresponding holes here on the passenger side that amount to the same position. I'm also using that hole on the outside that exists only on the passenger side for my sand flag for those days when I'm in Sand Hollow or someplace where I need to run that. So I think what I'm going to opt for is probably going to be this inside hole here, and puts these just inside my headlights. And as I look at this, I don't think it's going to interfere with access to my winch accessibly. So I think we're going to go with this. So removing these factory bolts is just a T47 Torx. There are aftermarket brackets available that fit this bumper in various ways, shapes, and forms. If there's a different location that you prefer, certainly there are some that actually provide a bull bar type coverage up and over the top of the winch as well. In this case, I am just going to use the factory hardware to attach it, and I think I'm going to get away with a long extension to allow me to cinch this down without having to remove the light from the bracket. Looks like that's as far as I'm going to get with the socket. So I'm going to cheat a little bit to try to get this without having to take the light out of the bracket. What I'm doing here, I've got an 8mm wrench on the bottom of my T47 Torx socket. I can just get the socket in there on the back of the light, and it'll allow me to tighten this down a lot tighter. This would work better with a ratcheting wrench, but that's okay. We'll be able to get it just the same. Illustrating how we've got this wrench back in there. So I've got the wrench coming through the bracket and the T47 socket back here. And that allows for this to be tightened down without having to take the light out. It'll also allow for us to adjust this later without having to take the light out of the housing. Initially, I'm just setting these up to be basically parallel to the back of the bumper, which gives them a slight turn to the outside for a little bit wider view. Hoping to be able to pick up the sides of the road pretty good with these. In my neighborhood, I've got a lot of resident deer herds, which is great fun at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's good to be able to see what's going on in the ditch. So located in this position, and this is a 5-inch light, there is some potential interference with this front tow hook. Really kind of a how are you going to use it conversation, and where you actually aim the light. Because if I aim this down, obviously it makes contact with the hook. If I come up a little bit, eventually I do get plenty of room where I could feed a strap through if I was trying to loop a strap over the end of this hook. However, at that point, I'm also probably, spotlighting airplanes. So this is going to be somewhere in the middle. We'll have to see if this becomes an issue for me. I tend to use a bow shackle anyway, so I'm not real concerned about not being able to get onto the hook, but we will see. And worst case, I may end up ultimately picking a different mounting location for these lights, or one of those aftermarket brackets. On the other hand, the other concern was whether or not this would interfere with my winch control or winch access. That's definitely not an issue, being able to reach and grab a hold of that along the side of the light. So this position that's just inside the headlights, yeah, I think I'm gonna like that location if they work out okay otherwise. So like most manufacturers, Auxbeam includes a pretty significant wiring kit with their lights, including this little surface mount switch here that includes both an on and off for the light itself, as well as the halo that's associated with it. So the way this Auxbeam harness is set up, we've got our battery leads that come in here, a 10 amp fuse, a pair of relays that are rated at 40 amps a piece, so way more than that 10 amp fuse. We come down this line here, and eventually we end up at the surface mount on-off switch. So one place, if you wanted to tie into this harness, would be right there at that connector for the on-off switch to substitute your own switches. The other lead off of this, coming off the relays, all the way down this path, eventually goes to the two connectors that go to the lights. Now, Auxbeam has put a 10 amp fuse in the system here. So we know that these lights only draw combined a maximum of 10 amps. The Upfitter switching that is present in the Jeep has either a 40 amp or 15 amp circuit from the factory. For that reason, I'm going to go ahead and eliminate the relays from this and just run the lights directly off the Upfitter wiring in the Jeep. It just makes for a cleaner, simpler install, and I don't have to locate these relays. But if you didn't have that, this is actually a really nice harness to make for a quick and easy install of these lights in another vehicle. On the Jeep, here on the passenger side, we actually have the factory wiring from the fog lights coming back and up into the body. What I'm going to do, since the Upfitter wiring is actually located about this location inside the hood, is I'm just going to follow that same path along the passenger frame rail to run the wiring for these bumper lights. Okay, at this point we have the bumper lights installed. We've dropped the wiring from the driver's side back down, and then it comes across here behind the winch and comes together with the wiring for the passenger side, which then goes underneath. And right now we've got it coming out just right here behind the body mount, because that was a convenient place to kind of reach in and thread. So the next step is to thread this up and have it come up here in the battery box, probably in the vicinity of this heater plug, because again, the Upfitter wiring is in this vicinity. Motor is still kind of warm from driving, so rather than sticking my hands in the hot engine compartment, I'm going to move back and start working on pillar lights. So to install the pillar lights, it actually leverages, the bracket uses right here in the shadow these two bolts up here, the bolt back here that the Rugged Radio's antenna bracket is using, and this bolt here. So those four will all have to come out. When you take those four out, the whole corner of the cowl comes off, and we'll actually take advantage of that to use that for routing both my antenna wire here as well as for routing the wiring for the lights. So for the factory bolts, it's a T40, and they just unscrew at once, just because and so this is removing the fourth bolt. Now these antenna brackets that I've got, these are just a Rugged Radio's part. It is a semi-universal fit for JK, JL. To give you a place to mount an antenna here on the front of the vehicle. Not a terrible mounting place, and a nice simple 1-bolt antenna. So then with that removed, you can just slide the cowl off the side of the vehicle, which will give you access to where we want to be able to run the wiring to support these lights. So the wiring harness for these lights looks to be the same arrangement as the other, although this one only has a single relay, though it is still a 3-pin connector to the lights. And we've got a slightly bigger fuse. If you're able to see that or not, this is a 20 amp fuse, where the other one was a 15, or was a 10. So we're still fine with this on the A or B circuit for the Upfitter wiring, but it is a little bit bigger draw for these lights. I take that back. This wiring harness is actually quite a bit different from the other one. It's a single relay, and we see that each light actually has its own separate harness that runs all the way back to the relay. So that's going to make routing the wires just a little bit different in the way we want to splice these together. It is, again, a little bit heavier relay. This is a 20 amp relay, And when we look at our wiring down here on the plugs, we see that we've got two heavy gauge wires and one very fine one. So I would guess that the running light aspect of these is a very low draw circuit. So with the corner cowls off, we can see where all of the wiring needs to be to run through. This little foam bulkhead that's here at the front of the cowl has a couple of holes in it. We can see them for existing wiring as well as potentially to run our new wiring. Since everything we want to run is going to be under the hood anyway, I think we're just going to come right through the existing hole with the existing wires there, and then we will run across to the far side over on the passenger side where the connections to our other wires as well as our connection to the upfitter wiring is at. So I ended up choosing to route the wiring for the pillar lights just a little bit differently, and decided that it would be cleaner to go ahead and route it under the cowl from one side to the other, and just take a fish and run it across the front of the Jeep. That allows us to take it to the other side and bring the wiring out here on the other side, just straight across, and then it's all one bundle when it comes into the engine compartment to come down to our upfitter wiring. Because what I want to do is to connect the wire, install the cowl and the bracket together, and then put the screws into place to hold the cowl, because we want this connector to remain down here inside or down in here below the cowl with the wiring feeding down, and it actually feeds through and then comes down the back side here where this hinge is underneath this. So it actually comes in under the hinge and down. Like that. I want to adjust the direction of the mount here just slightly to help drive the wire in where it belongs. And that's the end result. The bracket with the antenna bracket and the antenna. And now the antenna is not in contact with anything else. And the wiring will pass right through here between the hood and the cowl. And this is what it would have looked like if we had left the antenna bracket in the original location. I will probably go ahead and relocate this one up as well, just so it matches the other side. But it is in that lower position, and if you had a thinner antenna, it would probably just be fine. But yeah, that's how these look. They are, I mean, they're quite solid on the Jeep, so it's not like you're going to have problems with them coming off. But they are definitely, you know, the hardware just leaves a little bit to be desired. I think they must have cut a corner there when they were putting those kits together. Okay. So this is kind of how we ended up in the final state. We've got the wire coming back here, and sort of out from behind the hinge, and the antenna wire that comes out between the hood and the cowl. We'll step back and look at how the Jeep ended up. Probably still a little bit more adjustments to be made, but that's basically how these are going to hook up. Now we just need to make the connections to the upfitter wiring. So moving on to our auxiliary switches and the upfitter wiring connection. So the wiring is actually located right alongside the battery, and it's tucked down in there next to the battery by default with some electrical tape. So you kind of feel around for it, you find a bundle of wires, it's all wrapped up, and then you pull it out. And you can see we've got 4 wires here that come off of it. As expected, 2 heavy ones and 2 lighter weight ones. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the heavy ones for the front-facing lights that have, you know, either 6 or, well, so we've got 6 emitters on these, and we come down here and look at these on the bumper. We've got 3 emitters on the side, plus 9 emitters up front, and another 3 on the side. So that's 6 plus 9, and that's, you know, 15 emitters on each one of these. So we're going to use the heavy circuits for the forward-facing lights, and we'll use the lighter weight circuits for the rock lights and the eventual backup lights. So we go to our owner's manual, and it tells us that auxiliary switch 1 is a 40 amp circuit on the beige and pink wire. Auxiliary switch 2 is a 40 amp circuit on the green and pink, with auxiliary switch 3 being a 15 on the orange, and auxiliary 4 being a dark blue with the pink tracers. So we go back and look at our actual wires, and we have a beige and pink, we have a green and pink, which makes sense. We've got a blue and pink, that's switch 4, and the orange and pink, that is switch 3. So for today's purposes, we're going to end up using switch 1 for the bumper lights, switch 2 for the pillar lights, and switch 4 for the rock lights. We're not going to use switch 3 today at all. So we're going to go ahead and strip all 3 of these because we're going to use all 3 of them for today's project. So we've got the Jeep up in the air. We're starting to work on the rock lights. This is the second time I've used these Lux Lighting LEDs. What I like about these is the fact that there are, you know, it's this polycarbonate housing where the entire thing is the light encompassing the emitters and these high-strength magnets in the back, which means that you can basically put the light anywhere you want against a steel surface. And if you leave yourself a little bit of extra wire, you have the option to move it around a little bit where you like it. The upside is, you know, that flexibility. The downside is, of course, you can't put it any place where there isn't steel. So for instance, I can't put them up here on the plastic fender liner, and I cannot put them on any aluminum panel. I'm thinking this is a good place for my front because I want it, you know, up high where the light's not going to be getting into the rocks or anything like that. I also kind of want it in a place where it's not going to cast a lot of shadows or have other things that are shadowing. So like if I come forward on the frame here, I end up with a shadow from the skid plate. I can certainly go backward further if I thought that would be advantageous, but kind of inclined to suggest that it's about as far forward as I can without losing too much light due to the bumper is the goal. Working through this, again, I can't come out any further very easily. I could possibly attach it up here. Well, certainly on the side of the frame would work. That's going to throw a lot of light right straight out. This lip on the shock is certainly a possibility. It's big enough and actually has a pretty decent hold there on the light. So I mean, that's certainly a possibility. I think it would probably stay there. Could actually, that's actually viable. That's actually a really interesting idea right there. Just right straight down on top of the tire. I think I'm going to start though with this spot here. Yeah, attach it to the. It would attach to the sway bar. That's actually very interesting in its own right. Just have to accommodate movement up and down. That's actually a very interesting idea. It could go here on the bottom of the skid. The problem is, you know, the witness marks on my skid suggest that that's a place that the light could actually see contact. And it's just a little bit bigger than this recess that's up in here. So I think I'm going to go here initially, but I will leave myself some extra wire so I can move it around in this vicinity if I want to. As we come back on the vehicle, we've got a variety of choices again. You know, as I move kind of behind the tire, I could come out here on the frame, but I'm concerned that the while this is going to provide protection, it's going to throw shadows. There is an option, but actually right out here, right next to my rock rail, that's up high above the rock rail. We shouldn't get too many shadows from the suspension and other things to the side. And it shouldn't, and actually kind of shields a little bit light going out towards the observers. So I think I like that location a lot. As we move back to the rear, you know, in front of my rear tire, I've got a similar spot on the rock rail back here with the similar kinds of, you know, sort of choices of options. Again, a little bit of extra wire, and I'm going to start with it there on the rock rail. Now, coming back to the complete rear of the vehicle, at the absolute rear of the vehicle, I have sort of an interesting set of choices. I could come in, I can go out, but what's interesting is that the body mount up here, which is in a little bit of a recess up on the side of the bumper, so there's going to be some shadowing to all directions from here, but the body mount actually makes a really nice possible mount. If I decide I'm getting too much shadow from like the inner fender liner, I could move it down over here on the frame, which is kind of like where it's at on the front. Obviously, I'm going to get a lot of shadow from, you know, the skid plate and everything else, but I would get a lot more light potentially back down into where the rear tire is at. Not a lot of options to get outbound further. I mean, ideal would be kind of like out here. But again, I went into plastic for everything. Aluminum shock body. That's going to throw a lot of light in directions I don't want it to go. So I think we're going to give this a try and see how that works. And then basically do the same thing on the other side. So from here, it's just a matter of deciding what the best way to route wiring, and there's 20 feet of it from each light, best way to route wiring forward will be.